one of my favorite seasons, the eggnog season, as well as a turkey and a pumpkin pie. It is the hot stove, and it's not really hot yet. I mean, ovens maybe getting warmed up in some places. It's never really too hot around here in Baltimore. This guy covers all things baseball as well as life and politics even, as we all do out on the internet. Longtime baseball historian and author. We welcome our pal Rob Nyer back on from the left coast. And, we talked a lot of football. I mean, the Ravens got beaten Dallas this week, but it's certainly a good time to be talking about developing teams, putting teams together, and who's going to win next year. Because let's be honest, Rob, the Cubs have won a couple of off seasons in a row, which is how you get a parade in late October, right?
Yeah, they've had some incredible winters, no question. I think that there tends to be. I remember 2 years ago at the winter meetings, the Padres made a huge splash. They were probably the most active team in December.
That made me happy. I'm a Padre fan, and they never do anything, right?
But they did a lot, and then they tanked in the season. So it doesn't always work. The Cubs, though, have done basically everything right the last couple of years, and even things that didn't look like high-profile moves wound up, some of them anyway, being real important for them. So they're just on a great run right now. Look, the Cubs are going to make some moves that don't work out. Happens to everybody. Nobody bats 1,000 in that arena. But to this point, boy, it's hard to imagine things working out better than they have.
Rob, the people around here don't have any interest in the Masson debate or Angelos's money and sort of the minutia of the game. And the CBA thing's even thicker than that at a lot of levels. And I've been at this a long time. I mean, I remember the strikes in the early 80s and the strikes in the mid-90s and losing the World Series and running around covering all things Gene Orson, Don Fear, and, all of the parts of that. And now we're at this sort of uncertain time in an off season where no one's really talking about the sky falling or there being a problem, but there are going to be some new rules, there are going to be some changes, and there's going to be some rock'em sock'em here with the CBA, right?
I think so. It seems as if everyone seems optimistic about something being done, and certainly you remember what the atmosphere was like around those strikes and near strikes. You remember how poisoned everything seemed.
Oh, it's kind of like our political system right now. Everybody hates everybody. That's kind of the way it was at that point.
And it was done very publicly and with seemingly a lot of venom. And those people genuinely, a lot of them didn't like each other who were on the different sides of the negotiations. And you just don't get the sense that it's like that anymore. And maybe that's because
they're all rich.
That's right. I mean, you can look at it two ways. You can look at it like they're so rich, why should they settle? Why should they give in at all? On the other hand, I think the opposite is really operating. They're so rich, why kill this goose? There's so much gold. Why would we destroy that or even take a break? So I think they're going to get it all figured out. But it's going to be it's probably going to be the most interesting CBA that we've ever seen. I mean, the last one, for example, was basically just the status quo. And I think that this one, I mean, they're talking about making the draft international. They're talking about expanding rosters. I know that Rob Manfred, the commissioner, would like to do something to limit the pitching changes, which I think is a fantastic idea, by the way. All these things.
What would that be? What would that look like? You're going to tell Buck Showalter who he can put in and who he can't? I mean, it's kind of an interesting concept, and I think they've needed to expand the rosters forever in the way that they use pitchers and in the way that nobody has anybody on their bench besides, a 185 Taylor Teagarden catcher. There is no depth for the lineups, and there is no break when you want to catch Matt Wieters 142 times a year.
Well,
seemingly.
That's right, and I think that, and I'll preface this by saying I still think baseball is still a wonderful sport, obviously, and people still love the hell out of it, especially when their teams are doing well, no question. But I also think that if you were starting over, you wouldn't want to see 4 pitching changes or 3 pitching changes or even 2 necessarily in the same inning. It slows the pace down. And I do believe that baseball is a slightly better, more entertaining spectacle when the game is moving along and things are happening, and you're not going to a commercial break every 7 minutes. And what can you do? There are lots of ways you can limit relief pitching changes, and I don't know which ones, if any, have a legitimate chance of going through. But you can do things like just say every pitcher. An obvious one is every pitcher has to face at least two batters, or into the inning. That's one thing you can do, but there are lots of different options. It's going to be. I think it's a heavy lift to change such a fundamental part of the game.
Yeah, I wasn't around back in the 60s when they were talking about this designated hitter thing, and how that must have flared some emotions at the time. I mean, it's baseball. Try to change anything, and you're going to piss everybody off, right? I mean,
that's right. By the way, the designated hitter, that idea goes back to the 1890s or 1880s, and they almost got it through in the 1920s. But of course, it wasn't until '73, and then, believe it or not, in 1980, the National League nearly passed the DH. So these things all seem revolutionary when they happen, and then even if they aren't, and then after a while, you forget that they were revolutionary. And the same thing could happen with the pitching changes. We'll see, but I think we're likely to see a 26-man roster with maybe some drag on the use of relief pitchers.
Dude, we already had the revolution. I mean, the Cubs won the World Series, and they beat the Indians in 7 games. I mean, I don't know that the 2016 campaign, as the year comes to an end now and we start to look at next year and teams put their tickets on sale if somebody other than Angelos owns them, and you start to say, well, how could 16 have been any better for them? I don't know that it could have been. I mean, even in places like New York where the Yankees weren't a factor, they remained a factor, and they were the biggest factor on the trading deadline day. So even the haves who had not still have again. And as an Oriole fan, I'm very concerned about the Yankees. I spent some time in New York last week. People there are still talking baseball, and they have an arsenal now of young players that is kind of unprecedented going back 20 years to when they had Mariano Rivera and Pettit and those guys, Bernie Williams, come through that system.
Well, certainly Gary Sanchez looks like a tremendous player looking ahead. The problem the Yankees had this year was that until Sanchez came along, they literally had one better-than-average hitter in the lineup. One, that was it. And that was Carlos Beltran, who was 39, and by the way, might be back next year. So, and Sanchez couldn't and can't fix all of that on his own. They're going to have to come up with 2 or 3 more hitters if they're going to win, say, 90-plus games. Doesn't mean they can't do it, but the free agent market isn't that thick this year where you can just go out and buy a lineup. In fact, they've tried that before, and it hasn't worked, especially a couple or 2 or 3 years ago when they picked up Ellsbury and McCann, and I think there was somebody else, another big one in that winter. So I don't know if the Yankees are back in 2017. I do think they're on the right track, and when they've now cleared some of the dead weight away, first A-Rod and now Teixeira, and that's going to allow them to be a little more creative. But they're going to have a lot of competition in that division, as always.
Thoughts about the Orioles, Rob Nyer? We could sit here and still go through the Buck Showalter decision. We're going to be talking about that for months and months, and it certainly changed the complexion of the postseason and the way relief pitchers were used, that Zach Britton never got into the game. But none of that matters now. Now it's who do you want to play with next year, and as much as they made the splash last year and the old man spent all the money on Chris Davis, Trumbo's going to walk away, and that's 50 home runs that they need to kind of figure out, and I don't know that they want any more beer league softball here. I mean, it didn't appear, though, it was going to work last year. It almost worked, I guess, for a little while. They were first place for a long time. But the pitching, and who's going to pitch for this team next year, that's got to be the question of the offseason with all the money that they've got soaked into Gallardo and Jimenez at this point.
Absolutely. And it's not clear. As you know, there's the market, the starting pitcher market on the free agency this winter is awful. There's almost nobody out there. Rich Hill is basically your number one guy on the market, and Jason Hamill, and there are a few guys out there, but
we had him once.
none of them are likely to change the complexion of your rotation. So I think that look, I'm not saying you trade Zach Britton, but I also think that it makes sense to at least think about trading Zach Britton, figure out what he could get. Maybe he gets you a couple of, or at least one, at least league average starting pitcher who gives you 200 innings. I mean, you've got to start somewhere. And with what the Orioles have right now, especially with the loss of Trumbo, I'm not saying that they shouldn't let him go because he's never going to have a season like that again, most likely. But still, you've got to replace that production somehow. And you don't have to replace him in the lineup. You need to either replace the runs that he helps you score, or you have to prevent that many runs just to tread water. So the Orioles have a lot of work to do this winter.
Last thing for you, and I know you're big on social issues, and I cover the NFL more than I cover baseball, and we went through everything here with the Ray Rice incident and the videotape, and then the league went through it with Greg Hardy, and I mean Goodell at one point looked like his job was teetering at a press conference based on that. I find it fascinating that Aroldis Chapman went from being a guy everyone wanted to being a guy that no one wanted to being a guy that they hid in New York with the Yankees somehow and then dealt him into Chicago where he's holding the ball with the Chicago Cubs' hopes. It's incredible. Now Familia's involved in this. And, I guess in baseball, maybe domestic violence isn't as big a deal as it is in the NFL, or maybe the media doesn't cover it as such. But I find it fascinating that the NFL had its shield ripped apart a couple of years ago over domestic violence, and as it should. And baseball just sort of, gave Aroldis a little time out and let him come back and pitch in the World Series. And I'm sure the same thing with Familia. It is sort of a weird dynamic, though, that baseball has managed to steer clear of these incredible controversies that, when it's in the NFL or in the NBA, it winds up being talked about on the Chew and the View and the nightly news. With baseball, it sort of still gets pushed away in the old boys network in some way.
Well, I think there are a couple of things going on there. One is that certainly the NFL and the NBA occupy a larger place in the public consciousness now, at least in terms of the mass media. We've all seen the numbers about baseball's national TV ratings, for example, and granted the Cubs-Indians World Series changed that, but that was a blip. Baseball is still largely a local sport, and you're not going to hear about it as much on Good Morning America or whatever the national outlet might be. So that's a part of it. And I also think that these things are almost completely, for every league, about optics. And I don't mean to suggest that Jim Functionary at whatever league doesn't care about domestic violence. I think that most people, being decent folks, they do care. But as an organization, organizations don't have souls.
But as a punitive measure, there really was nothing done to Chapman, and Ray Rice can't get a job.
Chapman was suspended for a third of the season, basically, and which cost him a great deal of money. I think that the reason that the story was different in the NFL, as you recall, that basically nothing was happening in that case until there was actual videotape. And so when I talk about the optics, I'm talking about using that word metaphorically, but also literally. We had actual videotape of him beating the hell out of someone. And I think that if we had that, something similar in the case of, say, Chapman or Familia, you would see a different reaction from people because it's just that much harder. And I don't want to use the word ignore because Chapman wasn't ignored. Chapman was not charged with a crime ultimately and yet still missed a third of the season. I think at this point in our history as a society, and certainly in sports, that's about as much as you could hope for if this is something that concerns you.
Rob Neyer covers all things baseball as well as the writers of all writings. He is at Rob Neyer, that's Neyer. Working on anything? I know you're always working on something. You've been doing a lot of freelance stuff here lately, especially in the political space.
And I will tell you I'm working on a project I'm really excited about. It's a thing for complex sports, which I've been doing some work for recently. But I'm about 2 months away from publishing, so I can't talk about it. But it's about it's a big story that everybody knows, but the story's never been told in any real detail, and I'm looking forward to really jumping into that in the next few weeks.
That's why we need a writer of writings, Rob, so we can be told. Great having you on, man. Happy off season to you. We'll see you soon.
You too, buddy.
You got it. Rob Nyer, baseball historian and author, out on the internet at Rob Nyer, doing the freelance thing. Long time at ESPN as well as some other places, and a frequent contributor to all things Seam here as we talk baseball amidst pumpkin pie and turkey and a Ravens loss in Dallas. Cincinnati in town this weekend. We got a full week. Luke will be on the backfields out in Owings Mills. Zach Orr joins us on Tuesday night at Buffalo Wild Wings in Bel Air. Also doing a show next Wednesday after the holiday with him up in Harford County. Be telling you more about that. Swabbing for There Goes My Hero in the Bone Marrow Registry as well. Anything you miss here you can find in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear. Morning newspaper ships to your email inbox every morning at 7 a.m. It is brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. It's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life there. And if there's any breaking news to the holiday, you get it first on the WNST text service. That is brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard and the SSV on WNST, and Dennis Colotz is heard here every Thursday from 3 until 5. Wishing you a happy Thanksgiving. Last but never least, you can email me anytime. I am a very available individual. Nasty at WNST.net. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on Facebook Live, as well as at our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.